When the caravan left for the desert, not a single soul knew how many of us would return. We marched across land that buries memory and could not care less about human effort. Breathe in the dust. Try to tell survival from self deception, and you'll understand. The road across the empire does not connect its far edges, it devours them. Here, every step is an argument with history, where the only true judge is the sand. You think you are leading the caravan. In truth, it is the desert that leads you. But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm really curious to see who's joined us. Now, settle in. We're about to begin. You stand at the edge of the desert, where the last scraggly weeds cling to life, and the road ahead vanishes beneath a shifting blanket of sand. You are, by some misfortune or peculiar twist of fate, the leader of a caravan, a position often envied by those who have never held it and regretted by everyone who has. There is no applause for this role, no hero's welcome. You do not even get a proper hat. The desert stretches before you, a wasteland older than any empire, older even than the ambitions that built them. It is said, in the driest of official chronicles, that this stretch of sand once was a sea, back when the mountains were young and the sun was less cruel. But if this is true, it is only one more example of the desert's talent for disappointing expectations. Here, you learn quickly, hope evaporates faster than water. Your companions, if one can call them that, have already resigned themselves to misery. No one speaks as you inspect the camels, count the sacks of millet, and double check the water skins, which seem lighter than you remember. There are 12 camels, each with a personality best described as difficult, and 9 men, each with complaints he has yet to share. There is also one woman, the cook, who is rumored to have once poisoned a merchant in a town whose name nobody remembers. She has the steeliest eyes of the lot and never, ever smiles. Why are you here? This is a question for philosophers. You are here because the empire's roads run from one end of civilization to the other, and someone must carry grain, salt, and news from the cities on the southern coast to the distant, dust choked towns in the north. The empire itself does not care how you make the crossing, only that the taxes are paid and the ledgers are balanced. If you vanish beneath the sand, another caravan will eventually try again. If they vanish, another after them. The empire is patient, and the desert is even more so. Before the dawn, when the sand is still cold, you review the ancient rules of caravan travel. These rules, written in the old tongue on crumbling parchment, are mostly useless. Never trust a stranger, never travel alone, never eat dates before noon. You follow them anyway, out of superstition, or maybe because it is easier than thinking. After all, the first recorded caravan set out from this very city 1,123 years ago. It was lost to a sandstorm 2 days later. This is considered a success since one of the camels survived and was found several weeks later, somewhat grumpier than before. You recall, not for the first time, that every grain of sand beneath your feet was once part of a mountain, and that the sand will outlast even the greatest walls and towers built by emperors. In this place, history is not written in books, but in bones. Somewhere beneath the dunes lie the remnants of a merchant prince who tried to cross the desert with too much gold and too few friends. They say the desert swallowed him up in a single night, leaving only a few coins and a story nobody quite remembers. Your own story, should anyone bother to record it, will not be an epic. It will be a ledger. How many bags of millet? How many camels? How many days until the water runs out? This is the kind of history people find in archives, not in songs. If they ever build a statue of you, it will be in the shape of a weary traveler, squinting at the horizon and hoping for a cloud. With the sun rising behind you, you give the order to move out. The camels grumble, the men adjust their packs, and the desert opens its jaws to receive you. As you step forward, you wonder, briefly, if it is possible to walk all the way across the empire without once thinking about home. The answer, of course, is no. You are only one step into the desert, and already you miss the sound of rain. You think of the caravan as a single, unwieldy beast, but it is really a collection of individuals, each harboring a private despair. You lead the line, though leading is a grand word for trudging ahead with a sun bleached map and a tendency to mutter. The others follow because the only alternative is to be left behind. This is not the kind of journey for those who value optimism. The men in your caravan come from many corners of the empire, though it would be generous to call any of them friends. The youngest, Basram, claims to have joined for adventure, but you suspect he simply owed too much coin to the wrong people. He carries a knife and the air of someone who is never quite awake. Farouk, the quartermaster, can recite the price of millet in every city between here and the sea, but he cannot remember your name. You have traveled together for 3 seasons, yet every morning he addresses you as Captain, which you suspect is merely laziness. Then there is Iskander, the oldest man in the group, whose face is a map of every disappointment a person can experience. He has crossed the desert 7 times, which he insists is unlucky. Every night he tells a new tale about a friend who vanished in the dunes. None of these stories have happy endings. Sometimes you wonder if he is inventing them for your benefit, but it does not really matter. In the desert, every story ends the same way. The cook, Siham, remains an enigma. Her hands are quick, and her tongue is sharper than the blade she uses to gut fish when there is fish to be had, which is almost never. The men leave her alone, half out of respect and half out of fear. Legend says she once poisoned a merchant who insulted her bread. You have never dared to ask if this is true. The camels, in their own way, are the most reliable members of the party. You have 12, each named for a virtue or a vice, though no one remembers which is which. There is loyalty, who bites everyone, and wisdom, who will only move if you sing to her. Patience, ironically, is the most difficult, refusing to rise at dawn unless offered dates. All camels hate you, but only a few show it openly. You reflect on the ancient customs of caravan travel. In the earliest days of the empire, caravans were strictly organized. Every man knew his rank, every beast its burden. But centuries of travel have replaced discipline with cynicism. Now, your group resembles a pack of stray dogs, united only by hunger and mutual suspicion. At night, the men huddle close to the fire, sharing stories of lost cities and unclaimed treasure, though no one truly believes such things exist. As you march, Farouk drones on about tariffs and tolls, reciting from memory every rate imposed by every petty official along the road. He claims this knowledge will save you from ruin, though experience suggests otherwise. Iskander interrupts occasionally to describe some long dead customs officer who disappeared in a sandstorm, taking an entire chest of silver with him. You listen politely, knowing that sooner or later every conversation circles back to loss. In the hottest part of the day, you recall the endless arguments of scholars about the best routes through the desert. Some claimed the southern path was shorter, but full of bandits. Others argued for the northern route, which offered more oases, but also more officials demanding bribes. No one ever seemed satisfied with the answers. The truth, as every caravan master knows, is that there are no good roads, only bad ones and worse ones. Every path is paved with old regrets. Superstition weaves through your ranks like smoke. The men tie talismans to their belts, mutter prayers before sleeping, and refuse to mention certain words after sunset. No one will say lost or empty. You yourself avoid the word luck. Siham has a small amulet made of dried scorpion, which she insists keeps away evil spirits. The camels are indifferent to such measures, preferring instead to spit at strangers. You keep a journal, though you doubt anyone will read it. The empire's scribes care only for lists, numbers of animals, sacks of grain, bolts of cloth. They do not record the hours spent searching for a lost water skin, or the bitterness that settles in your bones after too many nights beneath the stars. There are no songs about the man who prevents disaster, only about those who do not. At sunset, you gather the men and count supplies. The numbers never seem quite right, though by now you know not to trust arithmetic in the desert. Basram volunteers for the night watch, eager to prove himself, but you assign the task to Iskander instead. Experience here is valued above enthusiasm. As the darkness falls and the first stars appear, you feel a familiar sense of dread. The desert does not care for your plans. Every journey is a rehearsal for failure. You lie awake, listening to the restless shifting of the sand, and wonder, not for the first time, why anyone ever thought this was a good idea. The first day in the desert is not so much a day as it is a trial by tedium. You begin before sunrise, when the sand is still cold enough to fool you into optimism. The line of camels creaks into motion, their feet leaving shallow, awkward prints in the hard packed earth that only grows softer with each hour. You count your steps at first, thinking it will help pass the time. It does not. By mid morning, you have lost track, and the monotony has already seeped into your bones. You try to estimate the distance traveled, but here in the desert, distance is a theory at best. The ancient method, beloved by scholars, was to count the number of steps taken by a camel in a given hour, then multiply by the number of hours marched. In practice, this only produces wildly optimistic guesses, since no two camels ever agree on a pace, and no 2 hours ever feel the same length. Some of the oldest caravan logs describe the journey between two oases as 300,000 steps, give or take 100,000, which is accurate only in the sense that it acknowledges defeat. You are not alone in your frustration. By noon, the men's tempers have frayed. Basram has tripped over his own feet for the third time and blames his shoes, which he claims were sabotaged by jealous spirits. Farouk spends the hottest part of the day arguing with Iskander about the proper method for folding blankets, a dispute so pointless that you are tempted to declare both of them right, just to silence the bickering. Siham ignores them all, muttering over her pots and making a stew that smells vaguely of old onions and crushed dreams. At midday, you pause in a scrap of shade cast by a boulder that has, for reasons unknown to anyone, not yet been claimed by the sand. The camels take the opportunity to collapse with theatrical groans. You sip water, warm as spit, and watch as the men argue over the rationing of dates. The sun is unrelenting, a silent tyrant with no sense of mercy. You wonder, not for the first time, how it is that so many empires have managed to convince themselves that the desert is a border worth defending. In the evening, when the light softens and the air cools, you circle the campfire and recount the old stories, those half-believed legends passed down from one doomed caravan to the next. There are tales of the lost city of Nephira, where all the wells run with wine and the gates are made of gold. There are stories of mirages so real that travelers spend days pursuing phantom rivers, only to collapse at the edge of nothing. Iskander shares a new one every night, of a merchant who claimed to have seen a ghostly procession of camels walking in perfect silence, leaving no footprints. No one ever asks how these stories end. In the desert, the ending is always the same. You stare into the fire and contemplate the wisdom of maps. Official documents, carefully inked by well-fed scribes in distant capitals, describe the desert as a series of straight lines connecting circles labeled as oases. These are lies, of course. The real desert is a swirl of dunes and dried up riverbeds, places that move and vanish according to rules no one fully understands. The men debate whether to trust the map or to rely on Iskander's memory. You suspect both are equally unreliable. Later, As you settle down to sleep, you recall the history of this particular road, a term used loosely since no road has existed here for centuries. The so called imperial route was first established by order of an emperor whose name is now only remembered because it sounds like a sneeze. He believed that by connecting the distant cities of his realm with a chain of caravanserais, he could bind the empire together. Instead, he bound generations of travelers to a life of slow misery and unreliable hospitality. Your last thoughts before drifting into uneasy sleep are of sand. Sand in your boots, sand in your teeth, sand that creeps into every bag and blanket, no matter how tightly they are tied. It is the constant companion, the true historian of the desert. When you wake in the morning, you know there will be more sand, always more sand, and always less water. But for now, the fire crackles, the men murmur in their sleep, and you drift off to dreams where the caravan never moves and the horizon never changes. No matter how many times you cross the desert, you can never quite prepare for the sandstorms. There is always the warning, a shift in the wind, a dryness in the air beyond what you thought possible. Sometimes the sky darkens subtly, the horizon blurring like a memory you never wanted to keep. Then comes the silence, a hush so profound it feels like the world has been put on pause, as if the desert itself is holding its breath. You sense the change before anyone else does, your eyes stinging, your tongue sticking to the roof of your mouth. Basram, ever oblivious, jokes that maybe today will finally bring rain. His laughter is short lived. Siham, more perceptive, begins tying cloth over her face with practiced efficiency, her eyes narrowing as she scans the shifting air. When the first gusts hit, the men scatter like frightened birds, snatching at their robes and clinging to anything heavy. The camels bellow and kneel, instinctively knowing that the best response is simply to endure. You bark out orders, mostly forgotten wisdom handed down from countless failed expeditions. Keep your mouth covered, eyes down, faces turned away from the wind. But the desert does not care for your advice or your attempts at dignity. Sand fills the air, a thousand tiny daggers stinging every inch of exposed skin. You can taste grit in every breath, and even the smallest gap in your clothing becomes a highway for dust. The world contracts to the space beneath your hood, a scratchy, claustrophobic darkness where all you can hear is the shriek of the wind and your own muttered curses. Each minute lasts forever. You wonder how many storms the Empire has counted and recorded, how many lost caravans are simply missing lines in a ledger somewhere, forgotten because their bones are too deep to find. Later, when the worst has passed, you emerge to find the world remade in dull, lifeless brown. Every shape is softened, every track erased. The men are quiet, faces ghostly with dust, their eyes narrowed against the lingering wind. Basram spits sand and mutters about curses. Farouk swears he has lost 2 teeth. Siham only shakes her head and begins checking the water skins, which have, as usual, managed to leak in the most inconvenient places. Iskander, survivor of storms too numerous to count, tells the inevitable tale. There was once a caravan twice as large as ours, with banners and guards and mules loaded with spices. They vanished in a storm not half as fierce as this one. Years later, traders found their bones scattered across the dunes, picked clean by wind and jackals. The only thing left was a cracked drum and a single sandal still laced. He pauses, letting the image hang in the air. No one asks if the story is true. In the desert, all stories are true until proven otherwise, and proof is in short supply. The practicalities of survival assert themselves. You check the camels, patting their rough necks, murmuring the kinds of reassurances you would never waste on people. Patience, true to her name for once, seems unfazed. Wisdom glares at you as if blaming you personally for the weather. You count heads and find, to your relief, that everyone is accounted for, though you cannot help but notice how everyone keeps glancing over their shoulders, as if expecting to see another storm rising from the ground. The night brings its own challenges. Sand finds its way into every blanket and bowl. Siham's meal is gritty and tasteless, but no one complains. The fire sputters, half choked by dust, casting weak, nervous shadows on faces that have aged a year in a single afternoon. Someone tries to make a joke about the imperial road being well swept, but the laughter dies before it really begins. You remember an old piece of advice from your predecessor, a man who led caravans until he could no longer count the seasons. If you get lost in a storm, do not look for the road, look for your people. Roads are for empires. Survival is for travelers. You think about how every storm erases the careful plans, the inked lines on maps, the proud claims of bureaucrats. The desert reminds you again and again that it does not care for human ambition. Tonight, as you lie in your sandy blanket, you wonder what the scribes in the capital would write if they could see you now. Perhaps a note in the margin: sandstorm, delayed 3 days, supplies diminished, morale low. It would not capture the taste of grit in your mouth, the sound of the wind howling like a furious animal, the fear that clings even after the sky has cleared. But that, you suppose, is the nature of history, always missing the parts that matter most. You fall asleep with the storm still in your ears, wondering if the dunes remember every caravan that tried to cross them, or if forgetting is simply another trick of the sand. You soon discover that the desert is not merely a trial of endurance, but a contest of the stomach. Every meal is a negotiation between hope and reality, where disappointment is the only predictable outcome. You, the supposed leader, set the tone by untying a bundle of supplies with as much ceremony as a judge announcing a sentence. The others gather around, eyes sharp, hands dirtier than the food itself. Breakfast is always the same: flatbread, so dry it shatters when bent, and a few withered dates. There are never enough dates, and each one is rationed with such pettiness that you wonder if the empire invented bureaucracy solely to manage these pitiful supplies. Water is measured by the sip, each mouthful watched with the suspicion usually reserved for sworn enemies. Siham, the cook, takes charge of the midday meal. She possesses a genius for combining whatever is left: millet, lentils, a handful of dubious spices into something that resembles food, but only in a technical sense. Today's stew is thick and brown, tasting mainly of resignation. Farouk claims he once tasted real cinnamon in a caravanserai near the coast, but no one believes him. Basram picks at his portion with the defeated look of a man reflecting on all his life's bad decisions, starting with this journey. The men grumble as always. In my village, we used to eat lamb cooked in honey and wine, Iskander announces, staring into his bowl as if the memory might transform its contents. Basram suggests that perhaps next time Iskander could invite the lamb along. No one laughs. Hunger makes even jokes feel heavy. You remember an old chronicle you read before this journey, one of those endless imperial ledgers listing what a caravan should bring. It was written in neat ink, full of grand advice. Allow no less than 1,000 sacks of grain per 10 days, and double that if traveling with dignitaries. The reality is, of course, different. Grain sacks always come up short. Something is always missing: lentils, salt, patience. Siham blames the empire's accountants. Farouk blames the packers. Basram blames fate. You suspect it is all of these and more. Dinner is a meager affair. The men stare into the flames, chewing slowly, as if trying to extract meaning from their meal. Siham tells the story of the ghost spice, a legendary ingredient said to transform any dish, but which led to disaster when a greedy merchant tried to corner the market centuries ago. He vanished in the desert, along with his fortune and a dozen camels. All they found were empty barrels and a letter to his mother apologizing for the taste. Iskander insists it is true. Farouk rolls his eyes. The water situation worsens with each day. You check the skins obsessively, willing them to hold more than they ever do. There is a subtle terror in the way the men glance at the water bags. It is a fear old as the dunes. Once, years ago, you traveled with a group that ran out of water 2 days from the nearest well. The memory sticks in your mind like a thorn. No one died, but for months after, even rain tasted bitter. You sometimes wonder why you eat dates at all, since the dust on your tongue dulls every flavor. Siham claims the dates keep you from losing hope, but you think they are only a reminder of all the things the desert takes away, starting with taste. You are convinced that the best meal ever eaten in the empire was in a city you have never visited, at a time that never existed. After dinner, the men fight over the remains of the bread, as if a few crumbs could change their fortunes. You put away the ledger, knowing that tomorrow there will be less of everything, and that your greatest skill as a leader is pretending to believe otherwise. Night falls and the sounds of the desert return, soft, endless, indifferent to your complaints. You lie awake, feeling each grain of sand pressing into your back, your mouth still sticky with the day's meager rations. You think of the empire's banquets, the endless tables loaded with food you will never taste. Out here, the only feast is for the wind and the jackals. You dream of water, cool and clear, pouring from a spring that never runs dry. You wake to the taste of dust and the smell of yesterday's stew, knowing that the next meal will be just the same. The empire, in its wisdom, records your progress by distance and cargo. It never asks what is lost with every day in the sand. The desert is not truly silent at night, despite what the city dwellers claim. It whispers, hums, and occasionally screams, sometimes in your imagination, sometimes not. Night in the desert is a time for fear, a time when the heat evaporates but dread condenses, thick and sticky, in the corners of the camp. You have always suspected that sleep is less about rest and more about escape. Tonight, the wind has died, leaving the world unnaturally still. The men huddle closer to the fire than usual, shadows jumping over their faces, each one lost in private superstition. Iskander, the unofficial historian of disaster, breaks the silence with a cough and begins the nightly ritual, telling a story that no one wants to hear. They say the old road is haunted, he begins, poking at the embers with a stick. Long before the empire, these dunes were the bones of giants. Their spirits wander here still, looking for travelers to swallow. Basram glances over his shoulder, as if expecting a ghostly hand to reach out of the darkness. Farouk mutters that he has seen more danger from bandits than from spirits, but his voice is a little too loud, a little too quick. Siham, never one for tales, busies herself sharpening a knife that no one remembers giving her. The camels, on the edge of the firelight, shift uneasily. Even they seem disturbed by the mood. You, as leader, are expected to dismiss these fears, to assure everyone that no harm can come while you are on watch. You try, but your voice lacks conviction. The fear of bandits is the only rational one. The ancient laws of hospitality mean little in the desert, especially on the old roads where the empire's reach is weak and mercy is an imported luxury. Caravan raids are a tradition older than tax collection. In the oldest chronicles you once read, entire sections are devoted to clever disguises, secret passwords, and the proper arrangement of campfires to fool would-be thieves into thinking your group is larger than it is. Tonight, you follow these traditions out of habit, knowing that a little deception is sometimes your best protection. The talk drifts back to spirits and curses. Basram ties a blue thread around his wrist, a charm from his mother, supposed to ward off evil. Farouk sprinkles a pinch of salt into the flames and mutters a prayer in a dialect so old you can only recognize a few words. Siham wears her scorpion amulet openly, daring the darkness to try her patience. You check your own pouch for the battered copper token you found years ago, a coin so worn that the emperor's face has faded, leaving only a vague outline. You carry it anyway, Some things are too old to disbelieve. There is also the matter of the real, tangible night terrors. Snakes slithering into sleeping rolls, scorpions seeking warmth among the packs, the occasional jackal with eyes that reflect the fire in uncanny ways. The men take turns keeping watch, but everyone knows that no one truly sleeps. The desert does not allow it. Every sound is magnified, every shadow grows teeth. You recall a particular night years ago when a caravan was attacked just before dawn. The raiders came with muffled hooves and faces wrapped in black. There was no warning, no chance to shout for help, just a sudden rush, a flurry of curses and steel, and the swift realization that the road offers no justice, only survival. You do not share this story. Some things are better left unspoken. Tonight, Basram jumps at a rustle in the brush. Iskander smiles, showing what few teeth he has left. You hear that? That's the sound of the desert reminding you it's always watching. The others laugh, thin and nervous. Laughter is another form of superstition here, a way to keep the shadows at bay, if only for a moment. You check the perimeter one last time. The fire is burning low. The men have finally drifted into uneasy dozes, and the camels make the odd, guttural noises that pass for contentment. You try to focus on practicalities. Water rationed for the morning, weapons within reach, nothing left outside the circle of light. Yet, as always, your mind drifts to the stories of spirits that travel on the wind, of bony hands rising from the dunes, of whole caravans gone missing with only their footprints remaining. It is said that in the deepest part of the desert, the line between myth and truth is as thin as the thread around Basram's wrist. You find yourself hoping, against reason, that the old stories are only that, stories. But as the darkness presses in and the fire dies to glowing coals, you wonder if perhaps every legend started as a warning, whispered around a campfire just like this. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow and full of restless visions. A caravan lost, footsteps erased by the wind, a voice you cannot quite remember calling you to wake before the dawn. You spot the first oasis long before you reach it. The line of palms stands against the horizon like a row of exiles banished from better lands. The men straighten their backs, and even the camels lift their heads, sniffing the air for some promise of relief. You feel the first real flicker of hope in days, a feeling so unfamiliar that you immediately suspect it of trickery. As you draw nearer, the illusion of paradise collapses with every step. The water is not the clear, cool pool of legend, but a sluggish pond, green and stubbornly resisting your optimism. The ground around it is trampled, and the only shade is fought over by the previous occupants. A trio of other caravans, their banners limp, their faces as unimpressed as your own. Siham surveys the scene with a glance that could curdle fresh milk. Another festival of mud and flies, she mutters. Farouk immediately begins negotiating with a sour-faced merchant over the price of grain and salt. Iskander claims to recognize a friend in every crowd, which is his way of checking whether any old grudges are still active. You have read the records about the great oases of the empire. Once, these were places of song, barter, and ceremony, a neutral ground where rival tribes set aside their feuds long enough to cheat each other over dates and water rights. Now, the only ceremony is the grim contest for the least uncomfortable patch of ground. Tradition, you realize, is often just the memory of better times. The ritual of drawing water is ancient and surprisingly bureaucratic. You queue with your skins behind a scribe from the southern provinces who insists on recording every drop as if the empire's prosperity hangs in the balance. Each caravan has its own method for extracting water. Some dig, some pray, some simply wait for others to leave. You settle for patience, watching as Basram attempts to charm a bored camel trader from the western lands. He fails miserably. You try to wash the worst of the sand from your face, but the water is tepid and tastes faintly of disappointment. The camels drink greedily, heedless of quality. Siham manages to fill the cooking pots and even snags a handful of wilted herbs from a passing peddler. She claims they are good for courage, or failing that, for stomach aches. Trade at the oasis is an ordeal masquerading as an opportunity. Farouk debates the value of salt versus dried fish with a zeal that borders on religious mania. You watch as three merchants nearly come to blows over a crate of spoiled pomegranates. Iskander offers unsolicited advice to anyone who will listen, recounting the story of a legendary deal in which a single date was bartered for a horse and a gold ring. Naturally, no one believes him. You hear scraps of news from the other caravans, rumors of bandits on the southern road, stories of an imperial tax collector who disappeared in the night, and a dubious claim that the next oasis has been closed for repairs, as if such things could be mended by committee. You take note, but trust none of it. In the desert, news grows wilder with every mile it travels. There is, nonetheless, a brief sense of camaraderie among the travelers. For a few hours at least, you are not entirely alone in your misery. Stories are swapped, mostly for entertainment, occasionally for warnings. You marvel at how quickly grievances return. By sundown, two caravans have quarreled over firewood, and a third has been accused of stealing onions. The peace of the oasis is as fragile as a clay jug in a camel's path. Night falls, and the air fills with the mingled scents of cooking, sweat, and unresolved tension. The men from all the camps gather loosely around separate fires, exchanging pleasantries that sound like threats, and threats that sound like gossip. Siham sits apart, brewing a tea so bitter that Basram suspects it of containing actual curses. You watch the flames, reflecting on how the oasis, for all its legend, offers only the briefest reprieve before the real journey resumes. You recall a tale from the Imperial Chronicles. Once, a sultan declared the oasis sacred promising that all who stopped here would be blessed with safe passage. He was found weeks later wandering the dunes, muttering about betrayal and poisoned water. His legacy is a faded stone marker, half buried by sand and ignored by all who pass. As you finally lie down beneath the palms, you notice that the stars seem sharper here, as if the sky is reminding you how far you still have to go. The oasis, for all its weary civilization, cannot shield you from the knowledge that tomorrow the desert will reclaim its hold, and hope, like water, will soon run thin again. The path onward from the oasis is marked not by signs, but by the gradual whitening of the earth. The green recedes behind you, replaced by an expanse so flat, so pale, that it dazzles your eyes even under a cloudy sky. This is the salt road, where the land itself has died, leaving only a brittle crust that cracks beneath every footstep. It is a place of endings, where rivers came to rest centuries ago, and the ambitions of empires dried up alongside them. Your first impression is of silence, thicker even than in the dunes. There are no birds here, no insects, only the wind, scratching a dry rattle across the salt, and the relentless sound of your own boots. The camels walk with lowered heads, their usual grumbling replaced by a kind of grim focus. You understand their mood. The salt flats are not merely unpleasant. They are, in the tradition of all deserts, a reminder that nature always has the last word. The history of salt in the empire is older than the empire itself. You recall, with a sort of weary amusement, the grand declarations of kings and chancellors who once decreed that salt was more valuable than gold. There are ledgers, hundreds of them, in the capital's archives, devoted entirely to the question of salt, how it should be weighed, measured, taxed, protected. One emperor, desperate to control the trade, ordered that all salt merchants must wear yellow robes. This rule lasted for exactly 11 days, until a sandstorm buried the entire salt market for a season. Since then, salt has belonged to whoever is stubborn enough to dig it up and foolish enough to carry it. In your own caravan, salt is both a blessing and a curse. A handful can preserve a week's food, but more than that ruins everything it touches. The men argue over how much to carry, how much to trade, and how much to leave as an offering at the crossing stones, a tradition no one admits to believing, but which no one dares ignore. Even Siham, who trusts nothing but her own knife, pauses before the first stone marker, pressing a pinch of salt into a crack with a muttered phrase in a language you do not know. The ground itself is your enemy here. The brittle crust gives way without warning, revealing pools of brine or treacherous mud beneath the surface. Iskander tells of a caravan that vanished in a single afternoon, lost when a dozen camels broke through the salt pan and disappeared into the earth. The salt is hungry, he says, as if hunger were a force of nature. Basuram tries to laugh, but it comes out thin and high. Even Farouk, whose faith in ledgers is unshakable, checks each step with a stick. Travel is slow, and tempers slower still. Every mouthful of water tastes of salt, and the bread, already stale, now seems to crumble into powder. Siham experiments with spices, but nothing can mask the taste. The men complain in new and creative ways, blaming the empire, the weather, each other, and finally, you. You accept the complaints as a sign of normalcy. When the caravan is quiet, you know the danger is worse. At midday, you stop to rest, though no one truly rests in the salt lands. The heat rises off the ground in shimmering waves. Iskander sits with his back to a rock, recounting the old proverb: a man can live a month without food, a week without water, but not a day without hope. Basram replies that hope, like water, is best consumed in small, regular sips. You take a moment to inspect the loads. The sacks of salt are tied with double knots. The camels are restless but uncomplaining. You find a crust of salt in every seam, in every crease of cloth, already beginning to eat through the leather of your boots. You make a mental note to oil them tonight, a ritual as pointless as any other, but rituals matter more out here, where sense and logic have gone to die. Evening brings no relief. The temperature drops suddenly, the salt snapping underfoot with every step. The men build a fire with difficulty. The salt absorbs the smallest moisture from the air, making even the driest wood hiss and sputter. Dinner is a silent affair. Siham serves a broth that tastes mostly of regret, and everyone eats with the same grim determination they used to cross the flats. As you settle in for the night, you recall the strange ancient custom of swearing oaths by the salt of our bread. No one in your caravan believes in old magic, but no one jokes about it either. The desert has a way of punishing blasphemy, especially when hope is thin and every grain matters. You drift to sleep with the bitter taste of salt on your lips, your dreams haunted by visions of caravans lost beneath a merciless white sky. The empire values salt for what it preserves, but you know it best for what it erases. No one truly loves a camel, and no camel has ever truly loved a human. This is a fact older than the empire itself, inscribed not in books, but in the bruises and bite marks that decorate the limbs of every caravan master. You begin your mornings among the beasts, pretending you have some measure of control. The camels, for their part, allow you this delusion because it suits them. They are the real governors of the desert. You have 12 camels in your care. You know each by the uneven pattern of their fur, the oddities in their gaits, the peculiar temperaments that seem designed only to torment you. Their names are inherited, swapped, forgotten, and then remembered at inopportune moments. Loyalty, for instance, is renowned for her treachery. Wisdom is afraid of shadows and sometimes of her own legs. Patience is universally despised for her stubbornness. Generosity has never shared so much as a glance. Fortune, oddly enough, limps only when you are looking. Basram claims that camels are the reincarnations of imperial tax collectors, condemned to walk the sands for eternity as penance for their greed. Farouk, ever the practical one, insists they are simply animals, though his careful way of measuring out their fodder suggests a respect bordering on reverence. Siham has a different philosophy. She avoids the camels entirely unless forced to approach, muttering a curse with every step. The Empire's chronicles are filled with observations about camels. One official account, written in excruciating detail by a scribe who clearly hated his posting, devotes 17 pages to the ways in which camels can express their displeasure. He notes, for instance, that a truly unhappy camel will refuse to move even if set on fire, though this, mercifully, was never tested. Another chapter warns against traveling with unmarried camels, a phrase no one has ever explained to your satisfaction. The beasts themselves are indifferent to human suffering. Their eyes, half lidded and full of ancient contempt, survey you as if calculating how much trouble you are worth. In truth, you owe them your life. The camels carry water, food, trade goods, and occasionally the bodies of those who cannot walk further. You trust their instincts more than any map. When the lead camel hesitates at a patch of ground, you steer clear. When they begin to complain in low, guttural rumbles, you check for danger on the wind. You recall the story of Gloom, a legendary caravan camel whose refusal to kneel saved an entire group from wandering into a sinkhole. The story is repeated at every campfire, growing more elaborate each time. Some say Gloom lived to the age of 40. Others claim he led a rebellion of camels against an especially cruel merchant. The only certain truth is that the desert remembers every act of caution and punishes hubris with equal measure. One evening, as the caravan trudges through a particularly soft patch of sand, loyalty collapses with a theatrical groan. Basram is convinced the camel is dying. Siham suggests it is faking. You kneel, check the beast's legs, and find nothing wrong except a foul mood. The solution, as always, is patience and a handful of dates. Loyalty rises, grumbling, and resumes her place at the front of the line. Feeding the camels is a science and an art. Fodder is rationed with a precision that would impress even the most jaded quartermaster in the capital. Every day, Farouk measures out portions of dry grasses, grain, and the occasional treat of crushed seeds. The camels express their thanks by spitting. Once, a traveler from the southern provinces brought dried figs as a gift, claiming it would make the camels faster. The only result was an epidemic of flatulence so severe that the caravan was forced to travel downwind for a week. Night brings a different sort of truce. The camels settle into a circle, their bulk sheltering the camp from the wind. You can almost believe in those moments that they are protecting you, though you know better. In truth, they are simply conserving warmth and plotting, in their slow, methodical way, the next opportunity to test your patience. The empire, for all its laws and armies, is built on the backs of these animals. The greatest cities, the most beautiful palaces, the most pointless monuments, all owed their existence to caravans that survived. thanks to the stubborn endurance of camels. You wonder if the emperors ever gave thanks, or if they too believed that history is written by people rather than by beasts. Before sleep, you walk among the camels, checking their feet for stones, their loads for slippage, their eyes for signs of fatigue. Loyalty nips your sleeve. Wisdom stares into the dark, unblinking. Patience, as usual, pretends not to notice you. You whisper a few words of gratitude, unheard, unacknowledged, but necessary. Out here, superstition is a kind of courtesy. You drift to sleep among the gentle rumbling and the occasional snort. The camels are already dreaming of greener lands, or perhaps simply of a world without humans. For tonight, at least, your fates are tied together by necessity and, if you are honest, by a grudging respect. The desert is vast, but not empty. The idea of solitude is another mirage. In truth, the roads are crossed and recrossed by other caravans, each one convinced that its suffering is unique. When two caravans meet, it is an event full of ceremony and suspicion, an awkward dance on shifting sand. Your first encounter of this journey happens just after midday, in a stretch where the wind has swept the ground bare of all tracks. The other caravan appears as a row of silhouettes, wavering in the heat. You halt, because that is the rule, to show good intentions, or, at the very least, to make sure that their intentions are not worse than yours. The rituals begin. Basram is sent ahead, holding a staff draped with a faded scarf, the universal symbol for not looking for trouble, though in practice it means nothing. The leader of the opposing caravan meets him with equal caution. After a few words, both groups relax a fraction. The men glance at each other's animals and loads, quick assessments made by eyes trained for weakness and opportunity. Introductions are exchanged with all the warmth of two rival tax collectors. You name yourself and your city of origin, carefully avoiding any mention of your cargo's true value. They do the same. There are never any smiles, only the faintest nods. Siham eyes their cook with open disdain, as if daring her to reveal a secret spice. Farouk, always hungry for information, trades news and rumors in a flurry of questions. He learns that the western route is blocked by flooding, the northern border is crawling with inspectors, and that a notorious bandit has switched sides and now sells protection for a price. None of these details are verified, but each is carefully tucked away for later. Trading is the heart of every encounter, no matter how much everyone pretends otherwise. The dance of barter is a performance both sides understand. Your dried apricots for their old cheese, your needles for their scrap of cloth, a handful of salt for a promise of safety. Deals are made with more argument than agreement. You haggle over everything: the weight of a bag, the quality of thread, the honesty of scales. Sometimes, just for sport, you haggle over the weather. It is during these encounters that you are reminded how little separates traveler from trickster. There is always someone telling the same jokes. Have you heard the story of the camel who became a tax collector, only if you have not heard the one about the merchant who sold sand in the desert. The laughter is perfunctory, a show of good faith in a world where trust is rare and stories are cheaper than water. The rivalry runs deeper than it appears. You recognize one of the other caravan's drivers, a man who once tried to shortchange you at a border outpost. You keep your distance, watching for any sign that old grudges might resurface. Iskander claims, as usual, to know half the men in the world. Whether this is true or simply his way of collecting gossip, you have never been able to decide. The camels, for their part, treat each other with more interest than the humans do. They sniff and snort, perhaps exchanging tales of ill treatment and better grazing grounds. You wonder if, somewhere in the desert, there is a legendary gathering where all the camels share stories of incompetent owners and miraculous escapes. When caravans meet, the exchange is rarely limited to goods. News flows in both directions, along with warnings. You hear of a well poisoned to the east, a new tax at the southern crossing, a caravan lost to a sandstorm, and a rumor, whispered and immediately denied, of a great city unearthed by the wind, only to be swallowed up again within the week. You file away each story, knowing that in the desert, every rumor is a tool and every warning a wager. After an hour or two, the encounter ends. There are no farewells, only the careful counting of possessions and a final, wary glance. Siham gathers the new ingredients with an air of triumph, as if victory has been achieved by the addition of two sad onions. Farouk updates his running tally of trade victories and defeats, writing them into the ledger as if history will someday care. As your caravan moves on, Basram mutters about the price of cheese. Iskander debates whether he has been insulted or not, and the camels seem unimpressed by the whole affair. You walk at the front, quietly calculating whether the news you have gained is worth more than the goods you have lost. The desert is always a marketplace, sometimes for salt, sometimes for secrets, sometimes for trust. By evening, the wind has swept away the tracks of both caravans. It is as if the meeting never happened. You wonder if, somewhere down the road, your story will become another rumor traded between strangers, embellished, exaggerated, and eventually forgotten. You reach the border of the next province, not with anticipation, but with the sense of doom reserved for tax season and funerals. In the empire's imagination, the borders are thin lines drawn by steady hands in well lit offices. Here, on the desert road, they are marked by sagging banners, broken milestones, and the sudden appearance of people whose main job is to remind you of your insignificance. The border post is little more than a huddle of mud brick huts, flanked by a half collapsed watchtower and a sign so faded that no one can agree what it once proclaimed. The guards are dressed in uniforms, two sizes too big or too small, each clutching a spear with the resigned air of someone who would rather be somewhere else. You approach with practiced wariness, rehearsing the correct combination of deference and irritation. This is a dance that every caravan leader learns. Bow too deeply, and they see weakness. Not deeply enough, and they see trouble. The inspection begins with the reading of names and numbers. You produce your ledger, stamped and signed by at least three officials, two of whom may actually exist. The border captain flips through the pages with sticky fingers, pausing at random as if hoping to catch you out in a lie. Farouk stands behind you, ready to explain why your cargo weighs less than it did 3 days ago, or why your camels are inexplicably taller than when you entered the province. The guards poke at your goods, prodding sacks of grain, squeezing bundles of cloth, and shaking tins of salt as if expecting coins to fall out. Iskander offers a running commentary on the process, quietly suggesting that the guards have never seen a real caravan before. Basram sweats, convinced that a single misplaced jar will doom you all to the dungeons. Siham watches with narrowed eyes, a kitchen knife hidden in her robes, just in case someone gets too curious about her spice pouch. Inevitably, the subject of taxes arises. The posted rates are carved into a slab of stone outside the hut, though the wind has worn the numbers to near illegibility. The captain insists on recalculating everything by hand, using an abacus so ancient that half the beads are missing. You know from experience that the numbers will not work in your favor. Farouk launches into an explanation involving tariffs, imperial decrees, and a legend about a tax-free crossing during the reign of Emperor Dustfoot. The captain is unmoved. Eventually, you reach the part of the ritual where coins must change hands. No one calls it a bribe, of course. It is an expedited service fee, a gesture of goodwill, a modest recognition of the hardships endured by the border staff. You hand over a pouch of copper coins, watching closely to make sure the captain's thumb does not slip inside for a little extra. The transaction is conducted with the solemnity of a religious rite. Everyone pretends not to notice. Once, the chronicles claim, border posts were places of celebration. Markets sprung up, entertainers performed, news was exchanged in the open. Now, the only entertainment is watching a junior guard drop an inventory scroll in the sand. The only news is the rumor that the next province is even worse. After the paperwork comes the lecture, reminders about the laws of the new province, warnings against trading certain goods, and a threat so vague it could mean anything from confiscation to exile. The men nod along, their faces set in expressions of practiced obedience. Basram asks whether the tax on onions has gone up or down this season. The guard does not know. No one knows. Iskander claims that in his youth, the border guards offered tea and dates to travelers. Farouk doubts this very much. You count your remaining coins. The sum is less than it should be, but you have learned that money, like water, has a way of evaporating on the road. The camels, oblivious to the drama, chew their cud and stare at the guards as if considering whether to bite one on the way out. Finally, with stamps and scowls, you are waved through. The guards retreat into the shade, The captain pockets his coins, and the road continues into the next stretch of indifferent desert. You lead your caravan on, the only trace of your passage a few muddy footprints and a lighter purse. As the border post fades behind you, Basram wonders aloud what would happen if the empire disappeared overnight. Would anyone bother to collect taxes from the wind? Farouk shushes him, citing bad luck. Siham mutters that the only sure thing in life is the hunger of bureaucrats. Iskander begins a story about a border so corrupt that the guards taxed the sand itself. But you stop him. There are still miles to go, and after all, you will face this dance again soon enough. The sun climbs higher, the coins in your pouch are fewer, and the caravan resumes its journey, just as lost, just as hungry, and just as entangled in the empire's endless, shifting lines. You have almost forgotten what rain feels like. After weeks under a sky that only knows how to glare, the memory of water falling from above seems both miraculous and dangerous, like a rumor too good to be true. The desert has trained you well. Hope must always be measured, and gratitude reserved for things that last. On the morning it happens, the sky looks different. Instead of an endless blue, there is a sullen grayness creeping along the horizon, a bruised and restless underbelly, threatening something more than just another dusty day. The men notice first, not because they expect relief, but because everything strange in the desert is cause for suspicion. Basram asks if it is an omen. Farouk consults his ledger, as if rain might be scheduled there. Siham merely tightens the coverings on her pots, resigned to whatever comes. The first drops fall like accusations, sharp and cold. There is no gentle beginning, no warning drizzle, just an abrupt pelting that soaks you before you can curse. The men scramble to pull tarps over the cargo, shouting as if volume might stop the rain. The camels, for once, look almost pleased. Patience opens her mouth to the sky, catching the drops like a beast rediscovering a lost birthright. You are forced to pause the march. The ground, baked harder for months, turns slick and treacherous in minutes. Water pools in old wagon ruts and then vanishes, sucked down by thirsty earth that is never quite satisfied. The men huddle under cloaks, every one of them pretending not to shiver. You remember old instructions. In case of rain, check the loads for leaks, secure every pack, and above all, do not trust the ground. Water can make the sand shift in ways that are as deadly as any bandit. The chronicles are full of contradictory advice about rain in the desert. Some say to rejoice, for it brings life. Others warn that it only stirs up trouble, awakening scorpions, softening salt roads into traps, and, on rare occasions, washing away entire camps. You recall one particularly dry report by an imperial surveyor. Rain fell unexpectedly. 2 tents were lost. No further incidents of interest. You suspect the lost tents were the least of it. After the initial shock, the rain becomes a steady drumbeat, a rhythm so unfamiliar that it feels ominous. Farouk and Iskander argue over whether to collect water from puddles or wait for the next well. Basram proposes dancing in the mud until the spirits are satisfied. Siham, with a look that brooks no debate, gathers everyone's bowls and arranges them to catch as much as possible. Even in the Empire, water is the only real treasure. The temperature drops and the wind changes. You find yourself missing the dry heat. The desert, when angry, at least is predictable. The rain is unpredictable, a force that obeys no rule, no season, no plea. The men try to laugh, but the sound is brittle. You watch the horizon, where the sky glows with lightning, and wonder how much chaos a single day's rain can cause. That night, the camp is a patchwork of wet blankets, damp tempers, and nervous jokes. The fire refuses to stay lit. Dinner is a cold affair, half cooked by steam and half ruined by the mood. Siham brews a tea that is more water than flavor, but the men gulp it down as if it were a rare medicine. Outside the circle of light, you can hear the desert's answer, a hissing, gurgling sound as water and sand fight for dominance. Stories surface as they always do. Iskander recalls the time a caravan followed a flash flood for 2 days, only to find the riverbed dry and the camels exhausted. Farouk tells of a merchant who claimed he could smell rain coming from 100 miles away. Basram wonders aloud if rain in the desert is a blessing or a warning. No one offers an answer. Superstition blooms with every thunderclap. The men whisper about ancient rituals, forbidden songs, and the dangers of sleeping with wet feet. You remember hearing that some tribes believe rain brings out hidden spirits, creatures best left undisturbed. Siham, more practical, checks her spices for dampness and curses the day she left the coast. By morning, the rain is gone as suddenly as it came. The desert, newly washed, seems almost gentle. The sand is firmer, the air cooler. The camels look satisfied, their thirst sated for now. But the road is changed, old tracks erased, new obstacles revealed, the direction itself subtly shifted by the water's passage. You gather your people and count supplies. No serious losses, only minor complaints and a story to tell at the next oasis. The Empire's records will note, if anything, a brief delay due to inclement weather. Nothing about the way rain scrapes the mind clean, or how, in the hush that follows, hope feels as fragile as a puddle in the sun. You set out again, the sky already clearing, the smell of wet earth quickly fading. There is no telling when rain will return, next week, next year, or never. For now, it is just another rumor in a desert that collects stories the way it collects bones. Illness travels faster than any caravan, leaping from camp to camp like a rumor, carried on the wind, on the hands of traders, in the very dust itself. You know this truth as well as anyone, but when Basram begins to cough in the early dawn, you pretend not to hear. After all, desert air is dry. It could be nothing. You reassure yourself with the logic that has failed so many before you. It is just fatigue, just dust, just. But the cough grows, thin and persistent, spreading unease through the camp more effectively than any warning. The men are quick to notice. Farouk, who prides himself on a strong constitution and an even stronger memory for symptoms, recalls every plague to haunt the empire for the last 50 years. He lists them quietly while checking his own pulse. Siham is less charitable. She declares Basram cursed, hands him a potion brewed from dried mint and the last shreds of her patience, and tells him to sleep as far from the others as possible. Your mind sifts through the history of illness on the imperial roads. Every route, every oasis, every bustling crossroads is stained by tales of disease. Some blame the wells, others blame the merchants, others still insist that curses cling to the trade goods themselves. You remember an entry in an old ledger, year of the yellow wind, 6 caravans lost to fever, 2 returned, but not the same. The empire's officials cataloged every lost man and beast, then went back to counting taxes. The symptoms always seem familiar: a cough, a fever, a rash no one admits to, a tiredness that seeps into the bones. Basram grows quiet, then withdrawn. The others watch him with poorly hidden suspicion. Iskander tells the story of a caravan that survived 3 weeks of plague only because their cook insisted on burning all the bedding and half the supplies. Farouk wonders if Siham is considering such a solution. Siham does not answer. Quarantine is an ancient art among caravan folk. You set Basram's bedroll a dozen paces from the fire, leave his food at the edge of the circle, and remind everyone to keep their hands clean, which is another way of saying despair quietly. The men obey, but the camp grows quieter. Even the camels seem to keep their distance, snuffling suspiciously in Basram's direction. Night brings fresh worries. The air feels heavier, laced with dread. Each cough, each sneeze, draws nervous glances. Farouk invents a ritual: 3 sips of tea, 1 muttered prayer, and a dab of salt behind each ear. Iskander claims this is nonsense. He prefers the old method of rubbing vinegar on the soles of his feet. Siham ignores them both and sharpens her knife in the dark, a sound that is both comforting and alarming. You remember the chronicles of the Great Plague that once swept the southern provinces. The imperial doctors prescribed isolation, boiled water, and faith, none of which stopped the fever from burning through 100 towns. The empire, always practical, sent tax collectors in after the worst had passed to count what was left. There are lists of numbers, but no record of the fear. The days pass slowly, each one haunted by the fear of the invisible. Basram recovers, or seems to, though his laughter is weaker and his steps less steady. The men debate whether the danger is over. Siham, ever pragmatic, says that only time will tell. Farouk keeps his distance just in case. Iskander suggests a celebration. No one has the energy. You check the supplies, counting each sack and skin, as if the right number could ward off sickness. The empire's wisdom holds that a well fed caravan is a healthy caravan, but you suspect the truth is simpler. Some journeys are survived by luck alone. Rumors of disease follow you on the wind. At the next oasis, travelers keep their distance, trading news in low voices. You hear that fever has closed the road to the west, that a town 2 days north is under quarantine, that a healer in the capital claims to have found a cure, though no one has seen him in weeks. The stories change with each retelling. Some grow more hopeful, others more dire. Siham advises caution. Farouk suggests haste. Iskander proposes detours. And Basram, still pale, says nothing at all. You weigh each option, knowing that none are safe, that every path carries its own risks. At night, you dream of empty roads and closed gates, of cities abandoned to silence. You wake to find the fire still burning, the men still breathing, and the world unchanged. The Empire will record this journey, if it records it at all, as a simple crossing, a matter of days and miles. No one will note the fear, the hope, the way every cough turned a camp into a courtroom. In the end, the desert teaches you that all travelers are equal in the eyes of disease, merchants, beggars, and emperors alike. You march on, grateful for each morning, unsure what the next one will bring. Night in the desert is a different world. The heat leaks away with the last light, and the sky swells with more stars than you can count, pinning the darkness above your head like a second skin. Out here, there are no lanterns to light your path, no towers to mark your progress, only the stars and your own imperfect memory. Every journey through the night is an act of hope and a wager against your own uncertainty. You have read the manuals, the wisdom of the ancients, the practical instructions copied from one generation to the next. Find the North Star, they say, as if it will leap from the heavens and wave at you. Follow Orion's belt, as if all belts point to civilization. But the truth is, after weeks on the road, your eyes are gritty, your brain is dulled by exhaustion, and the stars themselves seem to shift each time you look up. You tell the men you know the way. This, as with most things, is half lie and half faith. Tonight, you lie on your back outside the circle of firelight, staring upward. The camels grunt softly, settling into their dreams. The men argue about the names of constellations. Farouk insists he can see the whole imperial crown, a twisting, uneven line of stars said to grant fortune to those who never get lost. Siham, unimpressed, claims it looks like a broken ladle. Basram, eager to impress, recites an old poem about the seven sisters, but gets the verses wrong and turns it into a recipe for soup. Iskander, veteran of 100 crossings, insists the only stars worth knowing are the three that point to the old road north. He marks them with a gnarled finger, but no one else can see what he sees. A true caravan master, he says, can walk blindfolded and still find the next well. No one volunteers to test the theory. You remember the time you trusted a guidebook more than your instincts. The map promised a shortcut by following the river of light, a string of stars that dips low on the western horizon. You walked for hours, only to find the shortcut had led you in a wide circle, bringing you back to a clump of petrified wood you had already passed twice. The men did not complain, but the camels looked at you with their usual unblinking disappointment. The Empire, of course, has its own view on navigation. There are charts in the capital, expensively inked, painstakingly measured, decorated with gold for each important city. The scholars who draw them have never left their libraries. They imagine a desert tamed by geometry, conquered by mathematics. Out here, every line on a map is a guess, every guess a prayer. Occasionally, you meet a true navigator, someone who claims to have read the stars since childhood, whose ancestors mapped the heavens before the empire learned to tax them. These men, and sometimes women, charge outrageous sums for their guidance. Some are worth the price, others are not. You hired one once. He vanished with half your water supply on the third night, leaving only a note. Trust the stars. Trust yourself more. Sometimes the stars are obscured by clouds, by wind-blown dust, by the sheer weight of fatigue. On those nights, you march by memory or, more honestly, by guesswork. You invent landmarks, a crooked dune, a rock shaped like an old emperor's nose, the ghostly outline of a dried up tree. The men pretend not to notice your uncertainty, or perhaps they are too tired to care. Mistakes happen, as they always do. Once you marched all night, only to find at dawn that you had been heading south, not north. Iskander pretended it was an ancient trade secret. Farouk updated the ledger, recording the scenic route. Siham swore she would never trust anyone who could not distinguish sunrise from sunset. Still, there are moments when the stars seem close, when the air is clear and the heavens are arranged just so. In those rare hours, you feel connected to all the caravans that have ever crossed this road, to the nameless travelers who navigated by starlight and hope, to the ancient ones whose bones lie beneath the sand, still facing north. At such times, you almost believe in destiny, or at least in your own stubbornness. You rise, shake the sand from your clothes, and point to the horizon with more confidence than you feel. The caravan moves on, step by step, through the darkness. Later, when the Empire's scribes ask for your route, you will show them a line drawn by guesswork and desperation, punctuated by the occasional well and the endless constellations overhead. They will nod, pretend to understand, and then return to their lamps and charts, safe from the stars and the doubts that come with them. You keep walking, trusting that the stars, like the desert, reward only those who refuse to stop, even when they are lost. You see the caravanserai long before you reach it, squatting on the horizon like a tired animal, all crumbling walls and faded banners. It is supposed to be a place of rest, a promise made to every traveler who ever doubted they would see another morning. In practice, it is simply another stop on a road that offers no true safety. Still, the men quicken their pace. The camels grumble with something like anticipation, and even you feel a reluctant flicker of hope. The walls are high, or once were, built thick to keep out thieves, sand, and bad luck. Now, one corner sags, patched with timber, and the iron gates creak like an old woman's knees. You hand over the entrance fee, more than it should be, less than it could be, and the gatekeeper marks your caravan's name on a slate already cluttered with half a year's dust and half a century's lies. Inside, the courtyard smells of animals, sweat, smoke, and the faint, persistent scent of mold. Siham is the first to complain about the kitchen. Its fire too cold, its pots too few, its staff too surly. Farouk immediately finds the price of water and starts arguing with the keeper over the exchange rate, waving a scrap of imperial currency like a flag of defeat. Basram looks for a game of dice, Iskander for a place to tell his stories. The caravanserai is a city in miniature, a cross section of the empire's failures and ambitions. Merchants hawk goods no one can afford. Guards nap at their posts. Children chase goats between the pillars. And in every shadow, someone is measuring how much they can take without being caught. The other travelers eye your loads and your camels with the same blend of greed and resignation you have learned to expect everywhere. You find a patch of shade and try to rest, but the noise never really stops. Each time you close your eyes, a fresh dispute breaks out. Someone's water was stolen, someone's blanket is missing, someone has seen a ghost in the old well. The managers of the caravanserai are everywhere and nowhere at once, emerging only to enforce rules no one remembers agreeing to. Fires out by midnight, no singing after dusk, keep the peace or pay for the privilege of breaking it. You recall the official chronicles, which praise the caravanserais as marvels of imperial engineering, places where all the empire's subjects are welcome, provided their taxes are paid. The reality is more prosaic. Hard beds, thin walls, and food that tastes only slightly better than what you can cook yourself. Siham, never shy, bribes the cook for an extra handful of herbs. The meal is still grim, but the taste of fresh coriander almost feels like a miracle. Iskander claims to remember when this place was new, though no one believes him. He tells tales of famous travelers who once passed through, now reduced to faded graffiti and half remembered insults scratched into the stone. Farouk debates the safety of leaving your best goods in the locked storeroom. Basram wants to gamble away his last coin. You, as always, count supplies and check the camels whose restlessness mirrors your own. Sleep is fitful in the caravanserai. The walls are thick, but every sound echoes. A baby's wail, the braying of donkeys, the distant cough of someone regretting both the road and the soup. The beds are just soft enough to make you miss the sand. You hear footsteps outside, and once the unmistakable sound of someone testing the weight of your packs. You rise, check your belongings, and mutter a curse at the walls, which seem to close in a little more each night. Despite the discomfort, There is a strange comfort in sharing misery with strangers. Stories circulate like currency, a tale of a vanished caravan, a boast about a shortcut that saves neither time nor trouble, the latest gossip from the capital. Siham exchanges recipes with another cook, each outdoing the other in bitterness. Iskander trades stories for wine. Farouk quietly asks questions about the road ahead, hoping for some certainty that never arrives. By morning, the caravanserai is already emptying. Traders pack up their stalls, children are sent to fetch water, and the camels, sensing movement, begin to rise with groans and protests. You settle your account, grumbling at a surcharge you do not remember agreeing to, and lead your caravan out through the same creaking gate. No one bids you farewell. You suspect no one ever does. The empire records each caravanserai as a triumph, a link in the chain that binds distant corners to the center. You see only another place where people endure, bargain, and dream of moving on. Outside the walls, the desert waits, indifferent as ever, promising another day of sand, heat, and hunger. You do not look back. Out here, forward is the only direction that matters. The border of a new province should feel like a fresh start, a threshold to hope. Instead, it feels like the start of a new argument. Every crossing brings another chance to measure yourself against bureaucracy, suspicion, and the sharp edges of other people's desperation. In the empire, the border is where trade begins and trust ends. You reach the next border trading post at noon, your caravan battered by the wind and by rumor. The outpost is a huddle of squat buildings, half finished walls, and banners so faded that their colors are a matter of speculation. The main square is alive with noise, merchants shouting, officials barking orders, guards pretending not to notice anything that would require paperwork. The entire place smells of sweat, horses, dried fish, and opportunity. You quickly discover that trading at the border is less an art and more a test of stamina. Farouk, clutching his battered ledger, is in his element. He launches into negotiations with the local traders, arguing over every coin, every measure of weight. Salt is cheap here, but onions are priced like jewels. Dates are so expensive that even Siham hesitates before accepting a sample. The first order of business is to have your goods inspected, which in border dialect means pay someone to pretend to check your cargo while quietly hoping for a bribe. You watch as a scribe counts your bundles of cloth, then asks, very politely, if you would like them to be counted again for a small fee. Farouk, ever pragmatic, pays without a word. The men grumble over the shifting prices. Basram trades a bag of millet for a knife so dull it could be mistaken for a spoon. Iskander insists on swapping 2 sacks of lentils for a rumor about a shortcut to the next oasis. You try to explain the value of caution, but caution is the one thing no one wants to buy. Siham, never one to miss an opportunity, barters her own recipe for a stew in exchange for a handful of rare spices. She is the only one who leaves the market satisfied. Everywhere you look, schemes are unfolding. A merchant tries to pass off counterfeit copper coins. A pair of children swap empty jars for full ones when backs are turned. A caravan master from the north quietly laments the loss of a shipment of wool, blaming both fate and his own inattention. The official rate for everything is written on a board by the governor's tent, but everyone knows the real price is what you can negotiate with the man who sweeps the floor. You have read the chronicles, tales of legendary deals and infamous swindles of fortunes made and lost in a single afternoon. The empire remembers its greatest trades, but the road remembers every failure. You check your own supplies twice, then a third time, trying to ignore the feeling that something always slips away: an unnoticed pouch, a missing bolt of cloth, a sack of salt that never quite makes it onto the tally. As evening approaches, you try to balance the books. Farouk counts coins, frowns, and erases numbers with a muttered curse. Siham watches the other cooks, learning new tricks and passing along warnings. Basram dreams of rare cheese. Iskandar claims he has been cheated out of a hat he never actually owned. The camels, unimpressed, nibble on what passes for grass and wait for the next day's march. You negotiate one last deal: a bale of coarse wool for a promise that the customs officer will look the other way at dawn. Promises, are the weakest currency, but sometimes they are all you have. You wonder what the scribes in the capital would make of this economy, where everything has a price except honesty. By nightfall, the market has quieted. Fires flicker along the edge of the square. Merchants gather in small knots to count their profits and their regrets. You sit with your men, eating a stew that tastes of strange spices and old dust, listening to the low hum of gossip and complaint. Later, as you lie awake, you count the invisible losses, the tools that changed hands without record, the grudges born from lopsided trades, the stories spun to explain away every vanished item. In the empire's ledgers, these are called market fluctuations. Out here, you call them life. You drift into uneasy sleep, your dreams full of bargains gone sour and goods that cannot be replaced. In the morning, the border will be behind you, but the debts and doubts you collected here will follow like sand in your boots. The desert remembers everything, even when you would rather it forget. Your path, plotted and replotted, inevitably brings you near the bones of places that once thought themselves immortal. The men say nothing as the first ruins come into view, just a tumble of stone blocks, half swallowed by sand, but enough to make the air heavier, the silence deeper. You do not detour. No caravan ever does. The shortest route always passes somewhere the empire no longer bothers to tax. Somewhere, the wind is a little colder. The official maps mark these ruins as points of historical interest. The real guides offer only one bit of advice: keep moving and do not answer if you are called. The city you passed today has no name left, just a cluster of broken arches and collapsed walls. Iskander, Ever the storyteller insists it was once a capital, home to a king who could command rain and gold with equal ease. Farouk, practical to the core, says only that its wells have dried. Basram, who sees omens in everything, clutches his amulet and mutters a prayer. Siham scoffs, but makes a point of stirring her stew with a new stick rather than one from the ground. There are stories, always stories. Some say that those who sleep in the ruins will wake with silver in their hands, or with the voices of the dead whispering in their ears. Others say the old cities are cursed, a punishment for arrogance, for neglect, or simply for being in the wrong place when the sands decided to move. You have never tested these theories. Out here, curiosity is just another word for trouble. You study the stones as you pass, wondering what lives were lived here. The empire's records, written in cramped script by bored clerks, reduce entire cities to a single line: abandoned, reason unknown. You wonder if anyone in the capital ever reads those lines and feels a moment of loss. Basram asks if there is treasure. You tell him, with more certainty than you feel, that if there were, it would have been found centuries ago. Iskander claims the greatest treasure is the lesson that nothing lasts, not even memory. Siham, as usual, is more concerned about scorpions. The men walk a little faster, as if speed can outpace whatever lingers among the broken pillars. The camels, too, seem uneasy, their noses twitching at scents too old for human senses. Even the wind sounds different, quieter, as if listening for footsteps. You resist the urge to count your companions. Farouk, unable to help himself, sketches a rough map of the ruins. He notes a collapsed gate, a broken tower, what might have been a market square. He claims this is for future caravans, but you suspect he just wants to prove that someone was here once. It is an act of defiance against the forgetfulness of sand. Siham warns you not to look too closely at the statues, their features worn smooth by wind and time. They say the eyes remember, she mutters. You laugh, but avoid meeting their gaze just the same. Night in the shadow of ruins is not restful. The men sleep close, each one convinced the city's ghosts are roaming just beyond the firelight. Iskander offers a story about a merchant who found shelter in a temple only to emerge with hair turned white as salt. Farouk counters with a tale about a lost caravan rescued by the spirits of the ancient city. Basram just prays the night is short. You have read the histories. Once, this was a crossroads of trade and empire. Here, caravans brought spices, gold, new ideas. Emperors planned conquests. Poets composed epics. Merchants counted coins. Now there is only dust, and the quiet knowledge that the sand will someday swallow the last stone, the last story, the last name. In the morning, the men are subdued. Siham throws a pinch of salt over her shoulder before packing her pots. Farouk draws a final line on his map. Iskander offers to lead the way, just in case the city tries to call anyone back. As you walk away, You look over your shoulder only once. The ruins sit in silence, indifferent to your fear and your curiosity. The empire claims these places as part of its heritage. The desert claims them as part of its memory. You know better than to claim them at all. You march on carrying your own share of silence, hoping the ghosts are content with stories and the footprints you leave behind. There is a myth that the final stretch of a journey is the easiest, that every step brings fresh anticipation and a lightening of burdens. The truth is precisely the opposite. As the end draws near, each mile drags longer, the weight of every decision and every mistake settling deep into your bones. The men who once sang or bickered to pass the time now walk in silence, counting their blisters rather than their steps. Even the camels seem slower, trudging with the resigned patience of those who have seen too many roads. The horizon changes by inches, the sky somehow both closer and farther away. You have spent so many days measuring progress by wells, by dunes, by the rumor of distant mountains, that now, with the city only days ahead, you find yourself suspicious of every landmark. You wonder if you have missed a turning, or if the city is only another mirage conjured by hope and exhaustion. The sun rises and sets with indifferent regularity. Each dawn brings new aches, each dusk a new inventory of losses. The men grow introspective, each handling the weariness in his own way. Farouk counts and recounts what remains of your trade goods, muttering about the difference between profit and survival. Iskander speaks less, as if conserving his words for some reckoning at the journey's end. Basram stares at the horizon, dreaming of feasts and soft beds, or perhaps just of days with fewer decisions. Siham grows sharper, her patience worn thin like an old sandal. Even she, who has never let superstition pass unmocked, ties a thread around her wrist, a charm against disappointment, she claims. You feel it too, a vague sense of distrust, not of the men, but of the very journey itself. It is as if the desert, sensing your impatience, has decided to stretch every hour to test your resolve one last time. The air tastes of salt and regret. The wind, once your companion, now hisses warnings in a language you almost understand. The Empire calls this stretch the Road of Triumph. Among caravan folk, it is simply the Long Regret. Each night, the campfire is smaller, the stories shorter. The men debate turning back, not seriously, but in that joking way that is never truly a joke. Iskander claims he once led a caravan that walked in circles for 3 days, returning to the same abandoned well each night. Farouk speculates that the map is wrong, that the city does not exist, that the empire has moved it out of spite. Siham snaps that if the city has moved, she will move it back herself. There are legends of those who turned around mere days from the finish, convinced that doom lay just ahead. Their stories are told as warnings, cautionary tales of too much caution. You wonder if you will be counted among them. The chronicles, of course, never mention doubt. The empire prefers its travelers tireless and its roads straightforward. Fatigue brings a strange clarity. You recall every decision that brought you here, every shortcut taken, every deal made, every risk accepted or avoided. You realize how little of the journey was ever under your control. The road, the weather, the whims of strangers, these dictated your fate far more than your own will. You suspect this is true of all travel, of all history, of all empires. One morning, you wake to find that you have misplaced a day. Farouk insists it is the 29th. Iskander claims it is the 30th. Basram says it does not matter, so long as there is enough water for breakfast. You check the ledgers, but even numbers blur at the end of the road. Siham grinds a handful of bitter roots into tea, declaring that tradition requires a bitter drink before reaching any city. No one asks her why. The final approach is less a march and more a limping procession. The city's outline appears at last, shimmering in the haze. Towers, walls, rooftops. At first you doubt them, then you doubt your doubt. The men grow restless, alternately hopeful and resigned. Siham repacks her pots. Farouk finds a coin at the bottom of his pocket and spends an hour debating what he will buy. Iskander lists all the things he will not miss: sand, the wind, the taste of regret. As you reach the gates, there is no fanfare, no applause. The city is busy with its own troubles. Your arrival is an afterthought. You realize, with something like relief, that the journey's end is not a resolution, only an interruption. The desert does not care that you have arrived. The empire cares only for your cargo and your taxes. The road behind you grows cold, already erasing your footsteps. You enter the city, more tired than triumphant, with dust in your hair and silence in your bones. The men disperse in search of food, of beds, of anything not shaped by the desert. The camels are led away, unconcerned, already plotting their next meal. That night, you find yourself unable to sleep. The sounds of the city are strange and restless. You wonder how many other caravans have ended here, how many will begin again tomorrow. For all your doubts and regrets, the journey is over, at least for now. But you know, as surely as you know the taste of sand, that the road is never finished. Someone will always set out, hoping for a better ending. You close your eyes, unsure if you are dreaming of home or of another crossing, knowing the difference may not matter at all. The city is not what you imagined. Perhaps it never is. You cross beneath a crumbling arch where the banners of the empire hang limp, their colors worn away by too much sun and too little care. The walls, so imposing from a distance, are patched with mismatched stone, graffiti scratched deep into the mortar, names of travelers, half-remembered insults, boasts and prayers for luck. The gatekeepers barely look up as you pass, more interested in their dice than in the fates of strangers. Inside, the city is a riot of noise and movement. but little of it feels welcoming. Market stalls crowd the narrow streets, hawkers barking the same tired promises: freshest dates, coldest water, finest cloth. The smells of spice and rot compete for your attention. The men scatter almost at once. Farouk dives into the crowd, already haggling over grain and counting the cost of every transaction. Basram disappears in search of cheap wine and cheaper tales. Iskander lingers by the gate, as if reluctant to enter, as if the city might vanish if he looks away. Siham stalks toward the kitchens, muttering about what passes for bread in this place. You are left, for the first time in weeks, alone among strangers. The city does not greet you as a conqueror or even as a guest. Here, you are simply another tired face, another source of trade and trouble. The empire's officials are quick to appear when taxes are owed. A scribe in faded robes recites a list of tariffs, adjusting his calculations whenever your patience wavers. The process is meticulous, but the result is always the same: less for you, more for the city. Coins vanish as quickly as water in the sand. The unloading of the caravan is an exercise in frustration. The laborers grumble at every bale, demanding more coin for less effort. The camels, sensing their part is done, stand in a sullen knot, refusing to kneel for the last load. You check the ledgers twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of the numbers. In the end, there is always a loss. The empire calls it customary expense. You call it the price of arrival. You visit the merchant house, a grand name for a cramped office smelling of ink and mildew. Here, your goods are weighed, inspected, dismissed. The clerk behind the desk shrugs at your efforts, making notes in a ledger that you suspect is only for show. He offers you tea that tastes of dust and obligation, and in return, you sign away the last of your authority. The deal is made. You are paid less than you hoped, less than you were promised, but more than some have managed. This, you remind yourself, is victory in the empire. You wander the city, seeking something of the stories you heard on the road. There are no fountains of crystal water, no streets paved in gold, only alleys slick with refuse, and eyes that watch for opportunity. The palaces of the rich are hidden behind high walls. The poor sleep where they can, and every promise is written in chalk and washed away by the first rain. There are rumors, of course, always rumors. A shipment of silks lost to thieves, a magistrate who vanished with a year's worth of taxes, a festival canceled for lack of funds, but still celebrated in secret. You trade stories for news, learn which roads are safest, which gates will be closed, and which officials can be bribed. You realize, with a sense of resignation, that you have become a part of the city's machinery, a cog, worn but functional, in the endless cycle of trade and disappointment. The men return one by one, each carrying a small defeat. Farouk curses the price of grain. Basram complains of watered wine. Iskander claims to have heard the truth about a hidden treasure, but cannot remember where. Siham produces a loaf of bread that is somehow both stale and burnt, a feat she claims is unique to this city. You gather for one last meal, surrounded by the clamor and indifference of the market square. The conversation is tired, the laughter brittle. You toast to survival, to luck, to the hope that the next journey will be kinder. No one quite believes it, but the ritual must be observed. The city, for all its faults, has one final lesson to teach. Every ending is just another beginning waiting for someone else's trouble. As dusk settles, you watch the shadows climb the city walls. You wonder if the empire ever keeps its promises, or if every caravan is doomed to arrive here and find the same broken hopes, the same empty boasts. You promise yourself you will not return, but even as you make the vow, you know the road has already claimed you. Tomorrow, you will plan your next route, check your maps, and convince yourself that next time will be different. For tonight, you let the city's noise wash over you, as comforting and meaningless as the wind in the desert. You wake in a room that barely deserves the name, four walls crumbling in slow competition, a roof patched with tar and hope. The city rumbles outside your window, carts rattling, merchants shouting, dogs arguing over scraps. You lie still for a moment, reluctant to rise. Your body aches with the memory of every mile, every load, every coin lost to the endless arithmetic of the road. The journey is over, yet it clings to you. There is sand in your boots, bruises on your arms, a taste of salt that water will not wash away. For weeks you measured your life by sunrises and the rationing of bread. Now you measure it by the hollow echo of your own footsteps in unfamiliar streets. There is relief, but it is thin and sour, edged with disappointment. You find yourself missing the certainty of the next well, the small victories of a good trade, even the silence of the dunes. The men are already gone. Farouk left at dawn, ledgers in hand, searching for a merchant who owes him coin or apology. Basram vanished into the city's maze, chasing rumors of a new caravan leaving for the sea. Iskander was last seen bargaining with a fortune teller, wagering a night's sleep on the promise of better dreams. Siham, efficient as ever, left a note. Gone to the markets. Trust no one, especially yourself. You go through the rituals of arrival. Clothes washed, money counted, tales exchanged. Your ledger, when balanced, tells a simple story. Goods delivered, taxes paid, profit marginal. The empire's officials will record this as a success. The city's merchants will remember you as a customer. No one will recall the hours spent fearing a lost water skin or the sour jokes told over burnt bread. These details, the real texture of the journey, are not part of the record. You find yourself summoned to the city's hall, where an official, neither young nor old, thanks you for your service to the empire's prosperity. He hands you a stamped receipt and a cup of tea. The tea is cold. You are told you may rest here as long as you wish, so long as you pay your rent on time. You recognize this as the highest form of hospitality in any imperial city. Later, you walk through the market, half listening to the rise and fall of commerce. Everywhere, new caravans are being assembled, camels loaded, contracts signed, maps unfolded with all the faith of prayer. You see your own reflection in the glass of a shop window, a face lined by sun, eyes cautious and tired. For a moment, you almost believe in the myth that travel changes you. But the city is full of faces like yours, each one haunted by the memory of some other journey. That night, you join a gathering at a roadside tavern. Old travelers and young fools drink together, comparing stories with the competitive energy of men measuring scars. You add your tale, embellished in some places, softened in others. Laughter ripples around the table, though you notice how often it stumbles, tripping over memory. Someone toasts to roads that always lead somewhere. No one says home. The empire has its own ideas about endings. Its historians write of conquest and settlement, of goods flowing from the edges to the heart. You know better. The end of a journey is just a change of burden, a pause before the next accounting. Out here, no one escapes the logic of the road. For every arrival, there is the restless urge to leave. For every victory, the quiet knowledge that the sand will soon erase your footprints. As the evening grows late, you climb to the city walls and look out at the desert beyond. The stars are the same, silent and indifferent, charting routes older than any empire. Somewhere out there, another caravan moves, led by someone as tired and hopeful as you. The wind carries the sound of distant laughter and the promise of new beginnings. In the official history, your journey will be a list of goods, a tally of losses, a note about the crossing of borders. In your own memory, it will be the taste of dust, the weight of silence, the fleeting comfort of firelight. You wonder which is the true story. You suspect the answer does not matter. Morning comes, as it always does. You rise, gather what is left, and stare at the map with something like longing and dread. Someone knocks at the door, an agent of a new merchant, a messenger with a sealed note, or perhaps just Basram, grinning with another wild plan. The road is waiting, as it always is. You shoulder your pack, count your coins, and step into the day. The city fades behind you, already vanishing into the haze. The empire endures, the desert endures, and against all reason, so do you. History forgets, but the road always remembers. And somewhere, far ahead, the next crossing already waits.